I typically think, by the way, that Pate is good at his job. I think he covers the sport at a broad level fairly well. There's a lot that I personally look up to him in regards to. I model parts of my show after his graphics and many different things because he is the best of the best. That's why. And I already see an argument in the comment section saying he is right about the 5+11 ending up being mostly the SEC, though, Sam. Well, if the SEC is the best conference, they deserve to get the most teams in. That's what I like about the 5+11. It's meritocratic. If the Big Ten decides that they're going to start forcing all of their members to invest in football with 2 additional teams and more historic blue bloods and schools with bigger endowments than the SEC, they could take advantage of this. And then in the late 2020s, early 2030s, they could pack the most teams in. Like, I don't want to see Iowa State in the playoff every other year because they have to be to fulfill a auto bid requirement. Like, I hate that. I hate it. I mean, Iowa State, if they field a competent team, and by confident, I mean competent by playoff standards, so a good, great team, because only grade on up really has any chance of winning it. Do you really think that Iowa State last season, do you really, really think that Iowa State, do you really think that that team last year would have competed with Georgia, that they would have competed with Notre Dame or Texas, or heck, would they have even competed with Clemson? Like, come on, guys. That's not what I'm about here. I'm not about trying to say, oh, all the conferences are equal, because it's a disservice to football. It's not honest. You know, the Big 12 is closer to the WAC and Mountain West, and I am too young to talk about the WAC like I know the WAC, but I have, watched some WAC games. I've studied some of the Boise State teams under Chris Peterson, because those were very highly touted teams, even according to power ratings. I've looked and observed just college football as it's changed over time, and the more I'm involved in the sport, the more I'll learn, and the more I do learn, the Big 12 is closer to the Mountain West and the WAC of the old than it is to the SEC or Big 10. It just is. It is more distant from the Big 12 of old, like the 2000s, where you had Nebraska, you had Texas, you had Colorado with some good years, you had Bob Stoops in Oklahoma. It's not that anymore. They should not have 2 guaranteed teams, because more often than not, none of the teams they will field will be able to even reach the semifinals. Occasionally they will get 1, but you already have that 1 auto bid. You do in the 5+11 format. There are still auto bids there. There's just a ton of at-larges. And then for the ACC, honestly, more often than not, I think with Miami and then Clemson being around, because since Dabo hasn't retired already, I don't think he's going to retire until he literally can't coach anymore. If the portal and NIL was going to force him to retire, he would have already done it. I think that Clemson and Miami will be players for the college football playoff and national title. So for the ACC, I guess 2 slots makes sense. But at that point, why restrict him to 2? What if Florida State comes back? What if Georgia Tech under Key, if they keep him and continue to feed him resources? What if, and I know I'm rambling here, I'll get to the topic at hand. What if he can occasionally make the CFP or win 9, 10 games, 8 games a year instead of 6 or 7? Then, with the 14-team format, the ACC only gets 2 teams in when maybe they deserve 3 or even 4. I know the ACC's been super weak, but I love Key. I think Cristobal's going to figure Miami out. I don't think Clemson's going to go anywhere, because they did just have a bad recruiting class, but now they're rebounding there. Dabo finally opened up and is using the portal a little bit, and I think that they have larger NIL than some people figure. They just, like Ohio State and like Michigan of the past, they prioritize more the players already on their roster. They pay players to retain them, and then, like, if there is a Bryce Underwood, or for Ohio State, if there is a Jeremiah Smith, or there's some player that's generational, like, yeah, you go out and pay that player, but you prioritize the players who are already proven commodities, proven talent on your roster. I don't like how things are boxed in that 14 team format. I don't. Like, not one bit. I hate it. I hate it. I hate how teams are boxed in. The SEC and Big Ten should not be restricted to 4, because some years they will deserve more than that. The ACC and while the Big 12 probably won't deserve more than 1 or 2 every year, I can't tell you the future. I can't. There was a time where the Big 12 in the 2000s was way stronger than the Big 10. How times have changed in 20 years. There was that time. I mean, do we seriously think most of the Jim Tressel teams would have beaten some of Bob Stoops' best? I don't think so. What about the Joe Pa teams? Or none of them would have stood a chance against Pete Carroll's USC teams. We all saw how that worked. I mean, I didn't even watch those games live, and I can tell you by watching those games and highlights and looking at the talent USC had, you know what the Rose Bowl was in the 2000s? It was the annual getting Shrek'd by USC Bowl, where USC would play Penn State or Illinois or Michigan. It would be USC by the fourth quarter, their backups are in, or they're up by double digits, and you just know it's over. And again, how times have changed. Now USC went from the conference where they were the dominant player in the 2000s to one where now they're not even second fiddle. They're trying to be second fiddle. So boxing things in, even if it's in a short period of time, I don't like, because we're looking for stability. We're looking for something that can go the distance like the BCS did for 15 years. And a lot can change in 15 years. In 15 years from the beginning of the BCS, Nebraska went from the best program, or one of the best programs in America, to not even top 10 and kind of on their way out and moving conferences. That happened in 15 years. So I don't like it. Now, Juck's playoff proposal, which is, it's already been proposed. It's a 4 + 4 + 2 + 2 + 3. That gives 3 at-large bids. Notre Dame will likely take up 1, but that's at least an additional 2 that can go to, maybe 1 goes to the ACC or the Big Ten, or another combination of the Power 4. That at least provides more flexibility. I strongly prefer that over the 14-team model. Strongly. I mean, I hate the 14-team model with passion. So let's get into it. Honestly, I'm fired up about this. It sucks. It absolutely sucks, and you cannot convince me otherwise. The 5+11 college football playoff format is the best for college football. It is. It will safeguard college football's future and prevent it from turning into the NFL-lite, and I'm going to tell you why. Number 1, the number of at-large bids, 11, will allow flexibility and allow changes in the sport to be, they'll allow changes in the sport to impact the postseason. They won't keep the current order. They won't set super strict and not arbitrary rules, but they'll keep, it'll allow flexibility. It'll allow for changes. And I think that, gosh, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing for the sport. I really do. When you look at the number of at-large selections, the auto bids retain the importance of the conference championship game and being the best in your conference. They retain that. They also allow for some Cinderella stories, for maybe a 3-loss or even 4-loss team to win their conference and get in. They allow for some fun comeback stories. So I love the 5+11 format for the college football playoff that's been proposed by the SEC. I love it because it provides flexibility. It emphasizes the importance of conference championship games and winning your conference. That's why the 5 auto bids are there for the Power 4 plus the G5. And it also allows for tons of flexibility within the sport. What if the ACC is better in a few years than it is now? And instead of getting 1 or 2 teams in every year, they deserve more 3 or 4. Well, this format can adjust for that, unlike the 14-team CFP, where there are no at-large selections and they're all auto bids that will be extremely obtuse. That doesn't make sense at all. I know that right now it looks like the SEC and the Big Ten are the only conferences that'll matter in the future, and honestly, I wouldn't push back on that if you said that. I'm kind of that opinion myself. But at the same time, to a certain degree, they deserve that because they're the best in the business right now. They produce the best teams. They acquire the most talent. They do the best job at developing said talent. And the ACC's been kind of a mess. And the Big 12 is trying to still recover from Texas and Oklahoma leaving. And I don't know if they can truly ever recover from that. It was their only 2 blue blood schools, and they just got up and left for the SEC, making the SEC so much stronger. And they were already very strong, and it made the Big 12 so much weaker. But that's why the primary reason I love the 5+11 format is it provides flexibility, and not just in the long term, but in the short term too. With the strength of schedule metrics that the SEC wants to use, and yes, their power ratings, I know the power ratings are biased towards the SEC, but you can compensate for that by using a composite ranking system, whereas FPI currently uses ESPN recruiting rankings, which are more SEC biased. Use a composite recruiting system and then still prioritize game analytics over raw recruiting rankings. And I think you will have a solution there to any potential SEC bias. Adjusting for strength of schedule, moving the SEC to 9 conference games, moving the ACC to 9 conference games means all the power conferences are all playing 9 conference games, and because strength of schedule matters now more than it did before, and even then, it mattered more than people would admit. For example, there's a reason why Alabama at 9-3 was ahead of 10-2 Miami. Why? Strength of schedule and quality wins. Ole Miss and South Carolina were ahead of BYU, were ahead of Iowa State. They were even ahead of Clemson, who won a conference. Why? Well, for South Carolina, it was the head-to-head win, but also because they played tougher schedules. They did, and they played in a tougher conference. So if you make strength of record and strength of schedule matter more than they already do, well, that incentivizes playing non-conference games. Why is that? Well, let's say you're an ACC team or a Big 12 team. You schedule an SEC team because by preseason metrics and by reputation, they're viewed as the toughest conference in America. You get that win over an SEC team as an ACC and Big 12 team. Well, guess what? Your reputation is going to skyrocket as long as you hold on and don't lose 3 games in the regular season. It just is. And because there are so many at-large selections, if you have a quality win over an ACC or Big Ten opponent, an SEC Big Ten opponent, or if you're the Big 12, a win over an ACC opponent would be a huge boost to your resume as well because of the weakness of that conference, then you could get in without reaching your conference championship game. Think of BYU last year. BYU was Ole Miss losing to Georgia, or South Carolina losing to Missouri, or South Carolina losing to, I think, Old Dominion at the beginning of the year, where they really struggled in that game, away from reaching a hypothetical 16-team college football playoff. A huge part of the reason why, even though they lost to Kansas, Arizona State, is because they beat SMU on the road to begin the year, and that was a quality win. So already, it'll incentivize non-conference scheduling if done correctly. And it also provides flexibility for the long term of college football, rewarding the best teams and not just what we view as the best conferences right now. Because the best conferences, for example, you could have a bunch of teams in that 30 to 20 range, a bunch of them, and because of that, that's the best conference. But you could also have only 3 teams, let's say, inside the top 10 or top 15 in the strongest conference if it's a down year and everyone's being compressed by beating up on each other, and maybe the teams with the most talent are the least experienced and lesser talented teams are more experienced. The SEC this year is like that. Georgia, Texas, Alabama returns 60% of their production, but still they lost a lot. the top teams in the SEC lose quite a bit of talent, and some teams last year that didn't finish ranked, like Texas A&M, for example, they returned 70% of their production. Vanderbilt's close to that. I also look at a team like Auburn, who returns a bunch. Oklahoma returns a bunch, and they weren't even top 25 in final FPI. So I like the flexibility that the 5+11 gives the sport, and it doesn't pigeonhole conferences into only having this maximum amount of teams. That's not what college football is about. The 5+11 is the best because it's meritocratic and incentivizes out-of-conference games. It won't destroy them. Now, some teams won't schedule tough out-of-conference games, but that's always been the reality. Some teams love cream puff schedules. It depends on the head coach, the athletic director. The world's never going to be perfect. But in this format, I can tell you that like Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama and these bigger schools who are only going to lose at most 3 games per year and potentially at most 2 games per year, so they're almost guarantees in the playoffs, having those tougher out-of-conference games against maybe not really small opponents, because if they lose that game, it makes them look bad and they don't stand much to gain, but scheduling against bigger opponents, well, that can help them. It can give their staff an idea of what they have in their team, and it can also, if they lose, it's a quality loss, which is worse than a win, is better than a win against a cupcake. And if they win, it's a massive win that will be remembered for the whole season. The next part of this video is about why I think the 14-team playoff is a disaster. It is going to ruin the sport if implemented. I don't get it. I do not get why Josh Pate and Joel Klatt think the 14-team CFP with no at-large selections. I don't get it. I don't get why they like that. I mean, Pate has been saying forever, you aren't what your record says you are. And supporting the 14-team playoff flies in the face of that opinion. It does. Because if you are not what your record says you are, and you aren't, then 10-2 BYU is not better than 9-3 South Carolina. They're not better than 9-3 Ole Miss. They're not better than 9-3 Alabama. And yet he is advocating for a system where 10-2 BYU or 10-3 Iowa State will get in over 9-3 South Carolina or 9-3 Ole Miss, even though those teams would be much more competitive in the college football playoff. I just don't get it. Yes, the 5+11, I think, initially will be packed with more SEC teams than teams from any other conference. And that can be annoying. But they're the best conference. We should be rewarding the best of the best, not becoming all tribalistic and saying, well, since they're from a different conference, they can't be better than the teams in my conference. That's not how it works, because the teams in the conference I reside in the conference that my team is a part of, has to always be the best. Like, that's just not logical. What's logical is letting teams decide things on the field. And to a certain degree, power ratings won't let that happen. They almost have preseason floors and ceilings built into a lot of these teams. But at the same time, if a team that doesn't have a lot of star talent is winning games left and right by double digits, by 20, 30, 40 points, like Indiana, for example, they will finish ranked highly. Indiana finished top 10 in FPI. If they beat Ohio State on the road, they would have finished top 5 in FPI. If they beat Notre Dame, again, top 5 in FPI, for example, and they started the year super low, and they had almost no blue chip talent. So if you perform well and you punch above your weight class, and you are dominant, and you build a monster through development, the power ratings will recognize that. They will, because towards the end of the year, when the playoff rankings are unveiled and when ultimately Selection Sunday occurs and the playoff bracket's settled, at that point, recruiting rankings are not the largest factor anymore. They are how teams perform against their schedule. That's it. That's what it is. So I don't get the whole argument from Klatt or Pate talking about why the 5+11 model is bad. It's not. It's it's the only thing. It's the only way you could expand the playoffs and keep college football from looking like the NFL if done correctly. I still don't like the play-in games. I already made a live show about that, how I think the 16-team CFP with the top two teams getting a bye and two play-in games a week before the first round for 15 versus 14 and 13 versus 16 seed. I've already talked about how I think that's dumb. I think you should just do a 16-team playoff with no bye. That's, the traditional normal way of doing a 16-team playoff, the intuitive way. I don't know if that'll happen though. But even that model, as I think obtuse as the idea of a first four in college football is, would be much better than the 14-team model. There'd be no flexibility, no matter what. The SEC and Big Ten would get 4 teams in, no matter what. Even if the SEC or Big Ten has a super down year and they don't field the best teams, the best, top 10 teams, for example. They likely will, but you always got to factor in that what if. And then the ACC and Big 12 are pigeonholed at 2. Number one, the Big 12 probably won't field 2 teams a year that can actually contend for winning a playoff or even a playoff game. And the ACC will probably field around 2, some years 1, but some years they could even field 3, depending on how Florida State does in the future and what Georgia Tech does holding on to Brent Key, and maybe what Syracuse does with Fran Brown. I'm just saying, the 14-team CFP is not as flexible, and because all that matters in that playoff, all that matters is your record in conference games, it's going to kill out a conference. And do not buy what Pate's argument is that, we'll just have each conference form their own committee. When did adding more bureaucracy in college football do anything? Just look at the 4-team college football playoff and how that all unraveled. It's asinine. It's, in truth, extremely, it's moronic. Acting like more committees will do the sport any good. They won't. You need one committee. You need order. You do not need chaos. That many committees with that much diversity of thought across that many conferences with their own agendas would be disastrous. There'd be different standards enforced across the board. So whatever he says about how his model will work given certain parameters, those parameters are beyond unrealistic. They are. It's more realistic for the conferences to agree on a proper strength of schedule metric, and I don't even know if they will agree on that. But the idea that an enforcement body in college football, or that all 4 conferences will agree to have their own committees to determine which teams get in the 4+4+2+2+1+1 model, the 14-team model that's being proposed by the Big Ten, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And the ACC and the Big 12 will fight for the opportunity to have more than just 2 teams per year. The Big 10, if they have any stones and if they look at just the television revenue, the endowments of their schools, the fact they have 18 schools more than any other conference does, and they have very wealthy alumni and donor bases, will say, some years if we play our cards right, we could get 6 or 7 teams in. And then the SEC, right now, they're thinking the same thing because in metrics, they are the best conference. So more often than not, they would be getting more than 3 or 4 teams in the college football playoff. The 16-team model really benefits everyone except for the Big 12. And even then, it's what's best for the sport. So if what's best for the sport happens to hurt one conference and it's the weaker conference, I'm sorry, but that's how it works. And the Big 12 can compensate for that by scheduling out-of-conference games against the Big 10 or SEC and then beating some of those teams, which they are capable of doing, especially, I would say, at the beginning of the year before teams are worn down by depth and playing time and the schedule they face.